On June 15, 1944, Italian pilot Marco Benedetti scrambled his patched-together Machi fighter to intercept what he thought would be another routine American bombing raid over Rome, until he came face-to-face with the sleek, impossibly fast P-51 Mustangs that made his advanced fighter look like a museum piece from World War I. In that terrifying moment above the Eternal City, he realized his fascist leaders hadn't just lied about winning the war. They had sent him and his fellow pilots to fight an enemy so technologically superior that Italy never stood a chance. But what exactly did those Italian pilots see in American cockpits and hear in intercepted radio chatter that made them understand the true scope of their nation's devastating miscalculation? June 15, 1944. The sun barely peeked over Rome's ancient hills when Lieutenant Marco Benedetti walked across the cracked concrete of Ciampino Airfield. His worn leather boots stepped around bomb craters that mechanics had filled with loose gravel just days before. The smell of motor oil mixed with dust hung in the morning air. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang across the Eternal City, but their peaceful sound felt wrong in a world at war. Italy was dying. Everyone knew it, though nobody dared say it out loud. Mussolini's grand promises had turned to ash. German soldiers now controlled most of the country, treating Italians like unwanted guests in their own land. Food was so scarce that pilots often flew missions on empty stomachs. The black market thrived while honest families went hungry. Factory workers had no steel to work with, no coal to fire their furnaces. Marco's squadron had once boasted 36 fighters. Now, only 8 remained. His Machi C-202 sat in a hidden hangar, its paint faded and engine patched with salvaged parts. The mechanics did miracles with scraps, but miracles could not create fuel that did not exist, or bullets they could not make. Sergeant Giuseppe Romano wiped his greasy hands on an old rag. The experienced mechanic had learned to fly out of pure necessity. Too many real pilots had died. His weathered face showed the strain of keeping broken machines in the sky, with nothing but hope and spare wire. Captain Alessandro Conti gathered his men around a wooden table covered with maps. Dark circles under his eyes told the story of sleepless nights. He had watched too many young men take off and never return. The morning briefing felt like a funeral service. "American bombers are heading for the rail yards again," Conti said, his voice steady despite everything. B-24s, probably 40 or 50 of them. Same as yesterday. Same as the day before. Marco nodded. These missions had become routine. The Americans came every day like clockwork. Italian fighters rose to meet them. Some planes came home, some did not. The war ground on with the steady rhythm of a machine that nobody could stop. Romano raised his hand. "Captain, the mechanics keep hearing stories, radio chatter about new American fighters, fast ones." Conti waved dismissively. "Enemy propaganda, nothing more. The Americans have P-40s and P-47s. We know they're planes." But Marco felt something cold in his stomach. Rumors had a way of becoming truth in wartime. Still, orders were orders. Duty was duty. He strapped on his parachute and walked toward his fighter, not knowing that in 30 minutes, everything he believed about this war would shatter like glass against stone. The engine coughed to life, and Marco Benedetti climbed into the morning sky above Rome for what he thought would be just another mission. At 15,000 feet, Marco first saw them as tiny silver dots against the blue sky. The American bombers flew in perfect formation, their 4 engines droning like distant thunder. But something was different. New shapes danced around the heavy B-24s like deadly angels. "Madonna mia, what are these machines?" Marco's voice cracked over the radio as the first P-51 Mustang roared past his Machi at impossible speed. The sleek fighter moved like liquid mercury, its polished aluminum skin gleaming in the sunlight. Marco's own plane suddenly felt like a lumbering ox beside a racing horse. The dogfight lasted only minutes, but those minutes changed everything. The Mustangs climbed faster than any fighter Marco had ever seen. They turned tighter. They dove steeper. When Giuseppe's engine began smoking and sputtering, forcing him toward an emergency landing in a wheat field outside Rome, Marco watched in horror as 3 more Mustangs appeared from nowhere, moving like hunting hawks. Giuseppe's Machi hit the ground hard, bouncing twice before sliding to a stop. As he climbed from the cockpit, shaken but alive, the sky above him filled with American aircraft. Not just the bombers he expected, but wave after wave of fighters, transports, and reconnaissance planes. They flew in endless streams, their engines creating a constant roar that made the earth tremble. Later that afternoon, Giuseppe found the wreckage of a shot-down P-51 in an olive grove. The American pilot had survived and been taken prisoner, but the plane remained. Giuseppe stared at the cockpit instruments in amazement. Every gauge was perfect. Every switch worked smoothly. The radio was better than anything in the Italian Air Force. The machine guns had fired thousands of rounds before jamming, while Giuseppe's own plane carried ammunition for maybe 2 minutes of combat. Intelligence reports confirmed the impossible truth. American factories were building 2,000 aircraft every month. Italy struggled to complete 50. The numbers made no sense. How could any nation produce so much, so fast, so well? That evening, Giuseppe examined the American pilot's survival kit. Inside the small pack was more chocolate than most Italian families had seen in a year. Real cigarettes, not the sawdust substitutes they smoked, morphine for pain, a first aid kit with actual bandages and medicine. Even the pilot's flight suit was made from better material than Giuseppe's dress uniform. Radio operators intercepted American communications that night. The casual chatter revealed fuel loads that exceeded Italy's entire monthly supply. Pilots discussed spare parts as if they grew on trees. Ground crews complained about too much equipment, not too little. Marco lay on his narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling. The fascist newspapers had always called Americans weak and lazy, soft people who preferred jazz music to military might. But the P-51s told a different story. They spoke of factories that never slept, workers who built miracles, and a nation that turned steel into sky-born death with frightening efficiency. Everything he had been told was a lie. September 8th, 1943. The radio crackled to life in the squadron ready room, and Marshal Badoglio's voice cut through the static like a knife. Italy has surrendered. The war is over. Marco felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Giuseppe dropped his coffee cup, and the sound of breaking ceramic echoed in the sudden silence. Within hours, German trucks rumbled onto Ciampino airfield. Soldiers with hard faces and machine guns took control of the hangars. A Wehrmacht officer with cold blue eyes gathered the Italian pilots in the main building. His message was simple: fly for Germany or face the consequences. Some pilots nodded quickly, fear written across their faces. Others, like Marco, remained silent. That night, Marco made his choice. He slipped away from the base in the darkness, carrying only his flight jacket and a small bag of belongings. Giuseppe followed, both men knowing they could never return. Behind them, the sound of German voices grew fainter with each step. They found shelter in the ruins of an ancient Roman temple on the outskirts of the city. The broken stones had stood for 2,000 years, watching empires rise and fall. Now they watched two young men grapple with the collapse of everything they had believed. Marco sat among the marble fragments, his head in his hands. "We were told America was weak," he whispered to Giuseppe. "Decadent, soft, but they build machines like gods and fight like lions." The words tasted bitter in his mouth. Every propaganda poster, every newspaper headline, every speech about Italian superiority had been a cruel joke. Giuseppe pulled out a small notebook and began to write by moonlight. His pencil moved slowly across the paper as he recorded his thoughts. "Their mechanics have better tools than our generals had cars. Their pilots eat chocolate while ours go hungry. We thought we were fighting an equal enemy, but we were children throwing rocks at giants." Day after day, American aircraft filled the sky above Rome. The sound of their engines became a constant reminder of Italian failure. Marco watched them through field glasses he had taken from the base. The planes flew in perfect formation, their silver wings catching the sunlight. Each one represented American factories working around the clock, American workers who had never known hunger, American freedom that created strength instead of weakness. The moment of complete understanding came on a cool October morning. Marco saw a formation of P-51s escort a damaged B-24 home, staying with the wounded bomber even when German fighters attacked. The Americans fought as a team, protecting each other, showing loyalty that fascist propaganda had claimed only existed in their own ranks. "We never had a chance," Marco said aloud, his voice carrying across the ancient stones. The Romans who built this temple had conquered the known world through organization, engineering, and discipline. Now, America had done the same thing, only better. The truth was finally clear, and it hurt more than any physical wound. May 1945. Marco stepped off the train in Naples and barely recognized his hometown. American trucks rumbled through streets that had been rubble just months before. Jeeps painted olive green carried supplies to rebuild what Italian bombs had helped destroy. The irony cut deep. His own Air Force had attacked these very neighborhoods, and now their former enemies were putting them back together. Giuseppe waited at the station, his face thinner but his eyes brighter. He wore clean clothes and carried tools in a leather bag. "I work for the Americans now," he explained as they walked through the city. "Fixing their planes, the ones they give to Italy for civilian use." His voice carried no shame, only quiet pride. The Americans paid fair wages and provided good equipment. Everything worked. Nothing was broken or patched together with wire and hope. Marco's mother cried when she saw him, her weathered hands touching his face as if he might disappear again. At dinner, she served thin soup and hard bread while Marco tried to explain why he had stopped fighting. "The fascists lied to us, Mama, about everything. America was never weak. We were the weak ones." His words hung in the air like smoke from the oil lamps they used because electricity still came and went. The hardest conversation came with his father, a proud man who had believed in Mussolini until the very end. "You ran away," the old man said, his voice filled with disappointment. Marco nodded. "Yes, I ran, but not from the enemy. I ran from the lies." He pulled out a small piece of metal from his pocket, a fragment from the P-51 he had examined in the olive grove. "This came from a machine built by free people, Papa, people who could choose their leaders, speak their minds, build what they wanted. We fought for men who made us hungry while they ate like kings." Giuseppe found work teaching mechanics at the new aviation school. He showed young Italians how American engines worked, how American tools functioned, how American methods got better results than the old ways. His students learned English along with engineering. They understood that the future would be built with American help, American knowledge, American friendship. Years passed. Marco became an instructor too, teaching pilots to fly with precision instead of passion, with skill instead of speeches. When Italy joined NATO in 1949, both men supported the decision. They had seen American strength firsthand and knew that partnership was better than pride. In 1965, Marco wrote in his journal one final time about the day above Rome. "We thought we were eagles, but we were sparrows facing hawks. The Americans did not just defeat us in the air, they showed us what a free society could build. That P-51 was not just superior technology, it was proof that democracy creates true strength." We lost the war the moment we believed our own lies. The real tragedy was not our defeat, it was how long we fought against the truth.